Hey, welcome to Page Break. I'm your host, Brian McClellan, coming to you on a cloudy afternoon in the mountains of Utah. My guest this week is YouTuber and fantasy author Shad M. Shad is known for his massively popular YouTube channel, Shadiversity, where he dives into fantasy and medieval tropes, culture, and technology. Shad also talks more pop culture and reviews over on his other YouTube channel, Night's Watch. In addition to his video content, Shad is the author of the epic fantasy novel Shadows of the Conqueror, which came out in 2019. Shad and I talk about self-publishing, giving and receiving criticism, the sweet spot between realism and fantasy, expanding the scope of your business as a creative professional, and the process of learning and growing in public. Enjoy my conversation with Shad M. So, do you work out of your house?
Well, yes. I mean, we have... I do a bit of both. So I built a work studio out back, which is a separate building, and that's where we do all the filming, and that's where my editors and co-hosts work and things. And so, but that is on the same kind of property, so it's still technically a house here. So yeah, basically.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I got my computer here in the lounge room, right near the main TV, and so I usually sit back on the couch because I have my screen is on an arm lever thing, and I can literally just rotate it so it's in front of me when I'm on the couch. And that's where I kick back and play my games and things.
Yeah, that's very cool. I don't know a lot about Australia. Is kind of the place that you live and work, is it more the countryside?
Yeah. So I'm in country Victoria, beautiful area of the world. And I mean, we're about an hour and a half away from Melbourne City. And this is the area I grew up in most of my life. I grew up so I'm in a township at the moment, but I grew up a half an hour or 20 minutes drive up the mountain on a decent sized property. It was around 20 acres. And so that was just brilliant. And so I've always kind of just been in the bush, so been used to that.
Yeah, I grew up on 5 acres, and I now live on a third of an acre in kind of a neighborhood, and it's a very different experience. But I feel like those kind of big yards often kind of give you, when you're a kid who has a big imagination, those big yards are really helpful to kind of foster that.
Oh yes, my dad owned a construction business, and so he started it on the property that I grew up on. And so there were building supplies and timber just everywhere. And I would just make endless wooden swords and be running around hitting trees and playing pretend to my heart's content. Like, it was a wonderful place to grow up in.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like everybody who does something kind of creative, there was something about their childhood that kind of kicked them towards that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it's a big yard, or, maybe not having brothers and sisters around, or something that just kind of made their kind of imagination kind of foster more than maybe their athletic ability, things like that. Certainly worked for me.
Yeah.
So do you, with your business, with kind of Shadiversity and your channels and everything, is that all kind of centered around you? Because I know that you have a lot of other people that do some of the videos with you and things like that. But are you kind of the main business owner and kind of developer?
Yeah. And so I started it all just on my own, making videos. And it's funny because I started the YouTubing without the expectation that it would take off. I just wanted to correct a lot of incorrect information that was out there on things that I love, swords and stuff. But I also wanted to try and build a fan base that I could launch my writing career off. I wanted to be an author before I ever wanted to be a YouTuber. But YouTubing took off. It became really successful. That was phenomenal. And that, of course, really helped me out when I did publish, finally. The book's done great. And so I've built it up all from there because I guess I've had a good example. My dad's always been very good businessman. And, he started his own, like I said, construction business and things. And so I always knew that YouTube would be a springboard, a platform for me to be able to branch out and do other things. Because I've always wanted to do other things. Not only writing, I've got weird, zany, dreams of building castles and stuff. And so I just, it's like there's endless opportunity. And so from YouTube, I've been selling T-shirts as well. I've been trying to explore so I've been developing a graphic novel adaptation of my book, but we've run into a big kind of brick wall at the moment with printers. Finding a reliable printer, because I do not want to sell this thing and then have this massive delay and not fulfill through on the commitments and stuff. And so I'm really hesitant and cagey about that. But the graphic novel is done. It's like sitting there. We just need to find a really good printer that's reliable and also a reliable fulfillment method. But yeah, that's just another thing that I'm exploring and I've been branching out into. And now that I got, guys with me, we've started a new channel, which is reviews as well as gaming skits. And it's just kind of finding ways to make a living off things that you enjoy doing is the conceptualization of my life, really, in terms of my career path.
Well, and I find it more and more, it seems like kind of creative professionals end up almost by nature having to have like a tiny empire to really kind of create and kind of sustain what they do for a living. And I mean, like I live right up the street from Brandon Sanderson, and he has so many people working for him. If I pop over there, I rarely see Brandon. I always see all these different employees that I now know and I'm friends with. But it's funny how that kind of develops. And I see my own career kind of getting a little bit bigger with little side things and, kind of growing and growing and growing. And I talked to Daniel Green about this a little bit too with his YouTube channel, with just kind of the way you kind of have to keep looking. And it just kind of keeps going and going and going. And you're always looking for the next thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's a part of I guess, growth, really, because as soon as you find some success, well, I mean, if you really want to push that, you want to capitalize on that success because it leads to other success. It leads to other opportunities as well, which is just phenomenal. And it really is a matter of taking advantage of the opportunities that you have to begin with. And I find it interesting because some people say becoming success is more about luck. And I wonder about that because I think, especially if you're living in a modern nation, you have so many opportunities before you that all you need to do is jump onto and capitalize. Like, I mean, I wanted to be an author. I nearly got kept down in grade 6 because I was such a terrible writer. But I really loved creating stories. And so I needed to learn how to do it. I didn't have the money or time to go to college, university, or anything like that. But wow, there are these phenomenal resources online, like Brandon's writing lectures. And also Scott Card also has great articles on writing as well. And then, there's Writing Excuses, his podcast. And so I just dived into everything like that. And, I've had the equivalent of almost 4 to 5 years worth of university level education on creative writing that I haven't need to pay a cent on. That is a phenomenal, astounding, opportunity that was there the whole time. All I needed to do was jump on it, actually use it. And then YouTube is another one. It's sitting here right in front of us. And all it took was grabbing a camera and starting. And my content was not great when I started out. It's all a matter of improvement and learning and trying to get better. And that's kind of the process. And then you build those are the opportunities you take advantage of first. And then, of course, more opportunities come once you build off of that success as well, because, sponsorships come in and then people send you ideas for videos and then people invite you to go to events and things. And then you get to also meet people, connect with people. I mean, and then Brandon, after my channel had really established itself, Brandon ended up reaching out to me. Well, kind of reached out to each other almost at the same time, because he wanted to pick my brain as the weapons consultant for Stormlight 4, which was absolutely awesome. And again, it's one of those things where you need to kick it off. But once you get the momentum, you can keep pushing that momentum, and opportunities lead to more opportunities. Success can build even greater success, but it does take continual work and commitment, absolutely. And expanding, finding what you can delegate off. Like I used to do all my editing, and oh my goodness, when I first hired my first editor, it was like a new life. It was like I had a new lease on life. It freed up so much time. It was amazing. And so there's a lot of juggling, though, admittedly, because especially with starting the new channel, there's a lot more work, required in it. And so it's always going to be a bit of a process of trying to figure out, okay, what can I delegate? What do I need to do? And where can I find the time to do the things that I really want to do as well?
Yeah, for sure. When I decided to start a podcast, I was talking to a bunch of friends that do podcasts, and I was trying to get an idea of what to do with it. And I had a bunch of people say, "Oh, well, if you're trying to cut down on expenses, then just do the editing yourself. It's easy to do." And my first thought was immediately, I am an epic fantasy author. I do this for a living. I do not edit sound. I don't even do podcasts for a living. I will pay somebody to do this for me.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Right. And there is points in kind of your career, especially when you're, like when you're basically a small business owner, like that you have to decide on, okay, what do I cut from me personally? What can I pay other people to do?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's kind of terrifying. It's scary to like let go of control at times.
Yeah.
But also like really good for your time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I needed to register as a sole business owner early on, just because the money I was like, oh gee, I'm actually making money now. I need to register. And from that time on, it's been a balance of like, yeah, taxes and figuring out, and especially when you start to bring in employees and like permanent employees as well. That's when things can really get interesting, because it's not cheap either.
No.
And then having to balance the books and make sure everything's there. Yeah, it's also satisfying as well. Like you get a sense of I don't know. I derive a measure of satisfaction and fulfillment out of achieving things that are difficult yet fulfilling and worthwhile at the end. And so also it feels great to be able to be the means to provide a livelihood for other people. I think that's an incredible social good. And also working with when you find the right people, working with these great guys, it's just heaps of fun. And so, yeah, it is tough. You're absolutely right. And hopefully at the end of the day, it will be satisfying and fulfilling as well.
Right. That's one of those things that I kind of, it gets a little bit under my skin when you talk to people that are like the super hardcore self-pub writers, the ones that are very much into traditional publishing is evil kind of opinions.
Yeah.
And something I actually kind of take some pride in is, as being a successful traditionally published author, is that I am helping in some small way to provide jobs for lots of different people.
Mm-hmm.
I've got cover artists, I've got editors, I've got publicists, I've got all these people that maybe I only get, a week of their time every year, essentially. But in that time, I'm providing at least a little bit of kind of income for these people. And I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that I see benefits on both sides in big ways with self-publishing and traditional publishing. I self-published my novel, and that's been really great. And I have to admit, I really appreciated the control. I can be a control freak at times, especially with like, I want the cover exactly right and stuff. And so I had a lot of fun working directly with the cover artist and getting it just right and things. That was a lot of fun. But oh boy, it did take a lot of work. I mean, producing the audiobook version. It was a nightmare. I'm just saying, it was tough work and a lot of work. It turned out phenomenal. I got Michael Kramer and Kate Redding to do it. But the hoops I had to jump through because, I wanted to, of course, there are multiple ways you can do it if you're going to self-publish through Audible. But their platform to self-publish is called ACX, and ACX wasn't available or open to Australia. And so to do it, I had to register. Yeah, I had to register a US-based LLC. And to do that, I needed an actual US address. And so I needed to talk with some US friends who'd be willing for me to use their address for the LLC. I needed to register that. I needed to get the US tax identification number, all this stuff, to be able to publish this Shad audiobook. When I got all that done, and so I was able to, register on ACX, and then I still needed to produce the audiobook and make sure it fit all their specs right. So I had to teach myself audio engineering and all this stuff. And so when I do my next book, I'm pretty sure I'm just going to go through it into third party. There's some good companies, like you can actually still self-publish audiobooks through on Audible and stuff, but there's companies that will do the work for you. And so I'm probably just going to get them to do it next time.
I kind of wish that when you've got like writing classes, I wish that they would provide examples like that and be like, look, if you're going to publish a book, it's not just about being an author and doing the work to write it.
Mm-hmm.
This is the other stuff that you might have to deal with.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I'm lucky that if something is not overly complex, I usually feel confident enough that I can learn it, do it. And I mean, it's been kind of like the story of my life is teaching myself the things that I want to learn. And if I want to get really good at it, I dive into it heaps, like, creative writing and video production and things. But yeah, when it comes to self-publishing, if you really want to handle a lot of stuff, you need to have really, or at least have the willingness to expand your skill set to hit a lot of things. Like with the cover, there's graphic design, but also layout, make sure it hits all the right specifications that they want. There's also, I formatted the entire book, the actual inner material of the book using Volume, a program called Volume, and which is only available on Mac. So I had to buy a completely separate MacBook, teach myself how to use that program. And I did everything myself, and I'm not sure it's the best choice, but I was happy that I got the control, made sure it was up to my own expectations and standards. But yeah, so internal formatting, graphic design, audio engineering, review, and there were some, serious curveballs that I needed to learn along the way. And funny, I have this video that is just waiting to be made where I have a list of like unexpected curveballs that when you self-publish that you might just want to be aware of, that certainly I ran into. Even getting the color tone correct on the cover, because your screen does not reflect the correct printed color tone. And so the hardcover, when it was released, it was too bright. It was like, oh, this is garish. And so I had to go back and try and fix the cover. And it was already released at that point. And I'm sweating bullets trying to fix that. Oh, and then there's the formatting, like the position of the picture of the actual cover art when you're formatting it yourself doesn't like if you center it on the format they have, right? It doesn't mean that it'll be centered on the finished copy. I mean, I got the version here, but
yeah,
it won't be centered perfectly there. And so I had to try and get it as accurate, close as I could, order a printed version, get the real version, which took 3 days to double check that it was correct. And it wasn't. I was like, no. So I had to do all the process again to try and fix it. So there are some ultra rare special edition versions of my hardcover that has the writing off center. And if you happen to order the book during that window, well, you are very blessed to have this ultra rare special edition version and no one else has. It's a collector's item now.
Don't you love living in a world where our mistakes can be, a fan's something that they search for?
I hope that's the way they'll see it.
Fingers crossed, right?
Yeah.
I love that. That's fantastic. Hey, Page Break listeners. Brian here, rudely interrupting myself for a bit of a plug. Making a podcast isn't free, and I'm hoping that you enjoy it enough to pitch in a pittance. To do so, head on over to patreon.com/pagebreak, where you can toss as little as $3 a month into the tip jar, $5 a month to get the podcast ad-free and early, and $10 a month to hear your name in the credits and feel a smug sense of superiority. You can also buy my books from your favorite retailer, or direct from my website. Thanks to everyone who contributes. Now back to me. So you say you started with writing videos. Where did that tip over the line to end up being what your YouTube channel turned into?
Well, when I started, I had a primary focus on mainly just swords and how they're used, but I always tried different content to see what my audience might be interested in. I even tried some drawing tutorials at one point because earlier in my life, I wanted to be a comic book artist, and I didn't realize that I didn't like drawing. I just liked creating stories and then depicting them. And so when I started drawing other people's stuff, I hated it. But if I was drawing my own stuff, I loved it. which also was the big breakthrough for me to discover I liked writing, because I thought I hated writing. But just like with drawing, if I was writing something that I enjoyed, that was my own thing, it was the best thing ever. And so, I always was trying different things, but predominantly when I started, it was very much just medieval related, swords related stuff. But I've always done the occasional writing video, and that's been fairly consistent. And of course, because medieval history, medieval culture is so tied with medieval fantasy, and I've always loved it. Yeah, from the very get-go, I've always kind of loved to explore the intersection between medieval culture and fantasy. I'm a purist. I love, things that are very accurate to medieval period, but I always acknowledge that I love changes in fantasy. This is why I love Brandon's work a lot, is that I feel when you go to fantasy, try and at least put it on the foundation of something that's believable, realistic, and you can draw from history a lot to do that, because then that just increases the immersion. And so I love fantasy that is founded on, when I say realism, because people say magic isn't realistic. No, that's not what I'm talking about. When I say realism, I'm talking about believability. Like be consistent with your magic, give it rules, make sure it, things follow through.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting that I have a whole video. I love discussing these things. And so the video that I'm just referencing now is the discussion between soft magic and hard magic, and my own kind of interpretation and view on it. Because I find it really, really interesting. And my own take is that I actually feel soft magic does has rules. The audience might, or the reader might not be fully aware of what those rules are, but you're going to be educating the reader on what the magic can do just by literally what it does in the story. You establish something right there. Magic can do X. And then under what conditions can it do X? And therefore, if those conditions are repeated later on the story and someone logically might want to do that same magic thing and they're not, well, there's a potential issue there. And so I'm getting distracted on the thing, but so just exploring those concepts. And I've always loved fantasy that I find more believable, more immersive. And that's a lot of the kind of content that I do on my channel. I explore, okay, how can we look at it, or this fantastical element in this way, from either a more practical, realistic lens, acknowledging the fantasy, but to what I feel I'm kind of going for with a lot of my content and videos in regard that focus on this is about believability, increasing immersion, and being consistent with the things that you end up creating your story, the rules that you make and stuff. And again, because this isn't really pushing against soft magic or people that like the mystery or anything like that. But I do really feel like I can't stand when stories are inconsistent. They break their own internal, rules and stuff like that. And especially then there's the small nitpick things when people just, they have armor and the armor does nothing and it's chopped through like it's, tissue paper, and it's like, why are you even wearing the armor then? And saying, when weapons are used incorrectly, these are my ultra nitpicky things because I love medieval culture and weapons. And so from the very beginning, the larger portion of my content channel has been, all right, this is a sword. This is what it's called. This is how it's used. These are the strength limitations. These are all the other weapons. Let's talk about those. This is armor. Let's analyze how these weapons and armor are done in this film, or the castles from that property and stuff. So it's been a lot of different things.
Do you feel like kind of becoming someone who professionally nitpicks at pop culture? Do you feel like that has kind of made you enjoy watching things and reading things less?
Yes and no, because I also enjoy nitpicking. But no, it's interesting how that has evolved, because even more so now, because I've started a more focused review channel, is, for one, usually stuff that was just bad and you could tell would be bad from the trailers, I just wouldn't watch. Mm-hmm. And so, I try to just focus on media that is genuinely good, and I want to watch the stuff that's good. But now, because we have this review channel, people want me to ultra nitpick and tear apart things that are not good and stuff. And so I was like, all right, I'll take the bullet for you guys. Yeah. And I do find joy in breaking apart. Because what's interesting is, even when earlier on in my writing career, I also liked watching content that was reviewing things from a very objective lens, and also finding all the areas, even in properties I really enjoyed, because it was an educational experience for me, because this would educate me on what to avoid in my own writing. It's like, oh, you're right, that's a big plot hole. It helped me start to look at story more objectively, and therefore look at my own writing more objectively and say, oh boy, there's a big plot hole. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually rewriting an older story right now. This is going to be my next book. and it's a full rewrite now. And I had this old prologue. I was like, oh, this old prologue might work if I put it back in the story. And I went to look and it's like, there's a massive plot hole in this entire structure. And so I'm rewriting that. But that was completely above my head when I wrote that originally. And so it really helped watching this media that was looking at things and honestly, criticizing it. And the types of reviews, of course, I like are the ones that are as fair and balanced as they can be, and they'll praise things when it deserves to be praised. They're not just there to rip it apart. They're actually on the lookout for something that is genuinely good. And when they find it, it's really satisfying. That's what I'm like now, is when I watch something that is genuinely good, I enjoy it 100 times more than when I just watch anything and I could go along with whatever it was. If it was good or bad, I generally enjoy it. And so the enjoyment of media has both increased, but also the nitpicky side. I legitimately don't. I get frustrated, and even there's a good recent example on Night's Watch, which is my other channel, because I've been watching the new Wheel of Time show very carefully, and I have complicated feelings on it. There have been things I've really liked. I really have liked episode 4, but oh boy, episode 5, that made me legitimately angry.
Episode 5 is the most divisive among my writer friends.
Yeah.
Everybody either loves it or hates it, and there's no in between. And I'll be totally honest. I talk about this on the podcast a bit, is that my writer brain is always going. And so I feel like I've over time started enjoying things less because I'm always thinking about, plot and character and all that stuff. And I've been really trying to just turn the writer brain off to watch Wheel of Time, because it was a very formative experience for me in my teens. And I haven't read it for 17 years. And so I'm trying to just be like, okay, I vaguely remember this stuff. I'm going to just enjoy this. But it's interesting seeing the reactions, because the fan base is both massive and very, very opinionated. Mm-hmm. And getting those reactions from both fans, but also from professional creatives, is really interesting.
It has been. And so it's funny, I have a lot of trouble with episode 5. That one actually, like I said, it made me angry, but the rant, I've been loving just ranting about it, and it's been almost cathartic. And what's really interesting, the people who've been watching my reviews, that's one of the reasons they've been watching those reviews, because they've been calling it, it's like therapy, it's cathartic and stuff. But and the interaction with the fans afterwards and stuff, that has been just tremendous fun. I've been just loving that. And so even with media that I am not enjoying while watching it, I have really been enjoying the kind of the after show stuff, the discussion, right? After the fact, that's been great.
Well, and I got to imagine that kind of part of what you kind of sell as a YouTuber is, a lot of it is education. Obviously, you want to teach people about things, but I imagine part of it is literally people saying, "I'm tuning in to see Shad get angry about something."
Yeah. That's exactly what people have been saying about the episode 5 thing. And again, this is one of the things that I've been very lucky and blessed with, because I had a lot of different things that I wanted to do growing up, but it was always related about story. I've been just immersed in these fantastical worlds and stuff. And so one of the things I wanted to do was be an actor. And I've always enjoyed performing, and I've always gotten a buzz out of it. And that's really helped me out on the YouTube side of thing, because it is a performative art. Not always, granted, because YouTube it's a very interesting thing. There are different things that you can do to help become successful on YouTube. And if you have just got great information content, you could be just, one of the channels I love is Practical Engineering. The guy is just really smart, and I love his practical examples of engineering, and I've always had a deep interest in, engineering, science fields and things, and he's not a performer. He's very kind of monotone in his delivery and stuff, but his content is great, and so you can absolutely become hugely successful on YouTube if you can just hit one of the main primary points really, really well. Being a bit of a performer and character also helps, and I certainly lean into that quite heavily in my videos. And I just let my personality go wild at times, and I can get real ranty, screamy, and people can certainly enjoy it. But I don't do that, I guess, disingenuously. I'll only scream about something if it genuinely makes me scream, and it's usually in frustration. Like the only other time I've screamed that much was when I was reviewing Rise of Skywalker.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's all we have to say about that.
Yes, that's all we have to say. Nothing more needed.
Oh, that's fascinating. So do you feel like, as a critic yourself, do you look at criticism differently? Like, I mean, you would have engaged with it, obviously, as a YouTuber and for years, getting comments back from people. But then when you put out your first full-length novel, how did you feel that you kind of engaged with that?
Well, when my novel was released, I cannot think of another time in my life where I have felt more emotionally vulnerable than that time. I mean, you know, I've received criticism and feedback from my videos, but a small video that you work on for maybe a few days to a week is a vastly different thing to a novel that you've poured your, the saying blood, sweat, and tears into, and things, and all the work that I put into it. And yeah, that I was, oh boy, that was, but when those positive reviews started to come in, that was one of the most validating and elating experiences of my life. And then there's the matter of taking a step back and looking at the criticism. Now it's funny because I've heard different people have different ways of approaching criticism for a work like a book, which is a very personal thing. It's a big time commitment and stuff. And some people don't even read any reviews and they just let their agents send them the good ones and stuff. For me, there's probably, I don't know what's the best way, but I've always been very active in, trying to read heaps of reviews, written as well as the video ones that are made on YouTube and stuff. And it's been really, well, I don't know how I would feel if most of the reviews would have been negative. Maybe then I would have had to, because you can only take so much of an emotional beating. I'm lucky that most of the reviews are very positive, and so maybe I just like inflating my big head. But it's also very encouraging because those positive reviews just push me to want to write more and things. But it's not to say that I don't not read or pay attention to the negative reviews. No, I pay attention quite heavily. And I like to hear constructive feedback. And so when there is something constructive, I really do listen closely. But I also need to be very objective and aware that there's a good portion of criticism that is personal taste, and being able to differentiate between this is someone that is venting that they didn't like the book just because they just personally don't like distinct elements and stuff, versus someone who is actually trying to say something more, all right, this is an objective thing that could be improved. Because there are certain things in my book that I did knowingly, that I put in because I liked it. I wanted this to be in the book, that I knew going in, not everyone was going to like that. And I find it really interesting when people bring up those exact things, like the very thing that before I even published, is like, I'm doing it anyway. I like it. That's why it's going in. And then they try and say, this is objectively bad. I'm like, no, there's people who really, because what's really funny is on those notes specifically, there's a whole other side of people that say this is some of their favorite parts in the book. And so, yeah, I think, authors, they shouldn't just take on every single criticism that comes, especially when you're hearing people saying polar opposite things on the very same point that they're raising. It's like, in that case, you need to be objective in your own stand as what you want to, what the work you want to make is, and make a call on that. And so, I find the feedback very interesting.
I definitely, when my first book came out, when Promise of Blood came out, and I kind of was attached to reviews all the time, just reading them constantly. And but that, like, it made my eyes cross when I'd get a review that said, this is a terrible book, the characters are all one note, the plot is too slow. And then the next review would be, oh my gosh, I love the characters. They're so involved and the plot moves so quickly. And you're like, oh my gosh, my head's going to explode.
I know. It's amazing that people can get so stark different impressions. And that really, ultimately, it comes down to their own subjective taste and their opinions. And someone can have vastly different takes and views on something.
Well, how do you feel about kind of the process of doing something long form, like a big epic fantasy novel, versus the short form kind of the videos that you do? Like you said, there's the difference between something that you spend years on versus something that you've spent a couple of days on. But I got to imagine that there's something, there's almost different types of dopamine that you're getting from these two different things, because you get the little tiny shots from a video coming out every week or a couple times a week or whatever. And then you get that big shot of that giant novel.
Oh, yeah. You're right. Well, you enjoy both. Both have, finishing the book and getting that out there and seeing people love it is, it's a lifelong dream. It's hard to compare that to. With the videos, it's interesting. I'm always very aware and trying to make the best content I can based on the time I have available and things. And when you make a video that's really well received, that's really, really satisfying. The videos that don't do as well, it's interesting because there's a difference between a video that doesn't perform well versus a video that is received poorly. I'm lucky that very few videos are received poorly. I try and do my research and I work. It's not to say I've never made mistakes. I have. But I have more control. I have a certain amount of control. One, because there are videos that I've made that were received fine, but as time goes on, I've learned more. I've looked back. I don't like that video. And there's far less of an issue with me taking the video down. And there have been videos that I was like, I just don't agree with that anymore. I'm going to take it down. I think it's not saying the right thing. Or I just make a correction video. It's interesting about being able to fix something after the fact. You can actually, I have more ability to fix, like, for instance, if someone points out a typo in a book, it's like I have more control to fix that than I technically do out of a YouTube video. I can cut things now. You weren't able to do this early on, but now YouTube has tools online that you can actually kind of edit on videos that are already published. And it's mainly you just cut things. You can't put new things in the video, but you can take things out. And so if there was a slip of the tongue because I ad-lib my videos, and sometimes in my I have a way of over exaggerating. Sometimes it's like, I probably went a bit too far with that comment. I can easily cut it, fix it, and contextualize it. Luckily, there's been fewer times when I've just made a big mistake, but there has been the occasional one. And when I do that, I'll just make a video correcting myself. That's a lot easier to do then in those cases than making big changes to a book, I suppose. So it's a bit of a balance. But in terms of the satisfaction I derive from it, the video, there's like a group of videos where I get really, really satisfied and happy with how they turn out. And they're usually ones that are presenting new information. Because I'm about to go in to explain something, and the thing that I'm explaining has really kind of shocked me, really pulled me up. Like, I never imagined that I could be in this position or that I could achieve something like this. And this is where this side of YouTube becomes incredibly fulfilling. And it's the fact that my channel has grown large enough that in some instances, I've been able to shift the entire narrative or conversation on a certain topic. That's because, for instance, a good example is a funny topic, but it's the matter of boob plates, female armor. The fact that sometimes armor was made to accentuate a female's form would get just raked over the coals online everywhere. And I'm looking at this, and I have a strong historical context because I love medieval history. And I look at a very interesting equivalent of the codpiece, which was something that accentuated the male form that was literally made on armor. And I'm seeing this huge equivalence for male armor. And so obviously there was this very common thing in that they adopted fashion into their armor design that accentuated certain attractive features of their time period of the day. And because most men wore armor, and it was very rare for women to wear armor, actually there was occasion when they did, but because it was so much more rare, people weren't making armor that was directly made for women. But if they did, I was looking at it as like, it's a very good chance that they would probably end up making armor that would present the female form if it was such a cultural thing. And in fantasy, we see a lot more female warriors. And so I've made several videos on that topic. And it's amazed me that after those videos have come out, the entire conversation on that subject, nearly all online, if this subject ever comes up, people always bring up the references I raised in my video, and the entire mindset online seems to have shifted. There's still people that disagree, but they are few and far between now from some pretty stark evidences that I wrote in my video. And the fact that seems to have shifted the worldwide conversation on that topic has just made, I'm like, oh, wow, that's unbelievable. I can't believe that I could have that level of influence. That's amazing. And that's one, it is a bit scary because it makes me realize I have to be really careful about the things I say at times, because I do not want to accidentally spread something that's incorrect or anything like that. And this becomes a sticking point because I also have strong opinions. And so in an area, in a subject, like a subject that's more ambiguous in terms of what's correct and what's not, there needs to be a level of interpretation of the source material. And so therefore I interpret it as logically and as factually as I can, but that can lead me to different conclusions that other people have. But the people that have different conclusions, instead of realizing that, okay, we're still looking at the same source material, we're not like, making things up out of thin air, but because we come to different opinions, they can take it so far and say, no, Shad was completely wrong and is spreading misinformation, and it's a difference of opinion. And so that's where it can get really difficult to try and balance that side of things. But I still, of course, try to be as correct and factual and double check my sources as much as I possibly can, because there is that level of influence. And so there's been a number of things that topics like that I've been able to do on my channel, which has had a much larger effect than I ever kind of predicted. And that is just incredibly fulfilling.
Do you find it a little stressful? I mean, like going from making funny, well-researched videos to actually being reference material? Like, is that a little bit of pressure?
It is. The thing is, though, I have this wonderful philosophy, and it's that it's okay to get things wrong. Because if you get something wrong, you just correct yourself. And so that's the philosophy I had going into making content from the very beginning. If I get something wrong, just admit it, fix it, make a video. And the reaction to the way that, because I do that often, recently I made a video on the medieval longbow, correcting its actual place in history and the pros and cons. And that video was addressing some over-exaggeration that I gave to the medieval longbow in its place in a medieval context. And so I'm still doing it to this day. And I find it really satisfying when I get to, because being wrong is just the process of coming to greater truth, if you can recognize that it is. And I've always said I'd much rather know what's correct than be right. And so if you can show me the evidence, references, oh, that's awesome, I know more. And then it's just a matter of correcting the record, making a video, and then people respond really positively to that as well. And so that helps take away the the stress of the fact that there is a lot of people watching my content, and that it can affect, mindsets or viewpoints or opinions on a large scale. And you just got to do your best. And it's also because I've made videos correcting other videos that have gotten things drastically wrong. And I've always said, you can go back to my first time I did a reply to Matt Pat from Game Theory. He did a video on Knights versus Samurai versus Vikings, and there was a good chunk wrong. But I even said in that video, because I saw other creators responding to this video saying kind of they were effectively saying, shame on you for making this video. You should take it down. You should have never made it. And I always wondered, I don't really agree with that, because by him making that video, he's at least brought the subject matter to a much wider audience. And by doing that, that's led a lot of people to the video where I've been able to show the corrections. This is how it actually was, medieval period and stuff like that. And so that was literally an advantageous stepping stone for someone coming to the correct information. And so even if someone inadvertently spreads misinformation, if it's nothing dangerous, like, put out a fire by pouring gasoline on it or something like that, I make sure it's not dangerous or anything, but it can actually be the very catalyst for them learning the truth, where if that video was never made that had that misinformation, they might have never learnt what the correct information was, because they never had that thing that grabbed their interest, that caught their attention. And so I still considered it a net positive. And even with me, if I accidentally make something that isn't correct in my process, hopefully that will be the catalyst that will lead someone to the correct information, if that's me learning it myself, or if someone's ends up correcting me like I do with other people as well. And so that helps me that's my kind of philosophy, or way I view it, and the way I'm able to kind of process it all.
Well, and that was something I kind of picked up on, and I've got a bunch in my notes here. I picked up on that in your YouTube channel immediately. Was very fascinating to me that your channel seems to be much more of an evolving conversation, both with other YouTubers and yourself. I thought that was really fascinating, because you don't often, at least in the world that I kind of occupy as just an epic fantasy writer, you don't often get to see a public version of someone editing themselves and engaging with other creatives in a way of trying to kind of learn more.
That is something that I just love about the community so we call it the Community of the Sword. And this is a collection of, online creators that make sword-like related content. And so this is like Lloyd of Lindy Beige, Scala Grim, Raffaello from Metatron, Matt Easton from Scholar Gladiatoria, Todd of Todd's Workshop, and then there are a whole host of additional creators. Sorry if I haven't mentioned everyone in it, but they're all phenomenal. And this, it's kind of like a tone, the standard of this community was set before I ever became a big voice in it. And it was really, I honestly credit Matt Easton from Scholar Gladiatoria for doing it, where he would make these really respectful replies to some of the other creators in there, just saying, hey, I really like the video, but there's a bit more information we could discuss on it. It'd be really respectful when he disagreed and things, and sometimes he just wanted to talk further on it. And that kind of set a standard, a tone. One, when I saw him do that, I was like, that's brilliant. Another example is Scarlegrim. I remember he made a video on the Viking shield once, and another great creator who's in the same sphere, his name is Thrand, and he has a YouTube channel named Thane Thrand. He made a reply on saying, okay, you said these things. We're not exactly sure it works that way because we've had experimentation. Skull, he made this really humble response video saying, I agree with him. And I think it was too hard on himself. He was really kind of hung up that he felt he got some things wrong. But the fact that he was so humble to just admit it, when I saw that, it's like, that's what I want to be like when I'm making my content. That's really admirable. That's the thing that made me subscribe actually to Scarlegrim in the early days. And so I really admire these other creators that have been so respectful and set this wonderful kind of just standard tradition of respectful conversation on these topics, being willing to acknowledge when someone has something different to say. And what's been awesome is other creators that are coming into the thing, they're kind of doing the same thing, as long as we maintain this respectful kind of standard. And it's been something that we've been maintaining. And I'm very mindful to maintain that standard as well when I'm responding to people outside of the community and definitely within, because I love these guys. They make awesome content. I've learned heaps from them, and it's just phenomenal. It's just wonderful to be a part of it. And so when we have a topic that either we disagree on or we're adding more conversation on, it's phenomenal. It's awesome. And so then we promote each other in the exchanges, in the conversation. And the net benefit of it all is that we end up knowing more at the end of the day. And that's like, how great is that?
That's very cool. I've always had a very strong desire to not be considered the authority on anything, because it feels like a lot of pressure, which is weird because now I am a reasonably successful epic fantasy author. And so some people think I'm a bit of an authority on things, and they put me on panels at these big conventions and all these things. And I try to always phrase everything I say as just a dude who makes shit up and is decent at it.
I've always said from the very beginning is that I'm an enthusiast, right? I never have considered myself an authority, though some people do look to me as one, and that's an interesting contrast that I need to process and deal with respectfully. But I've always said, don't consider me an authority, double check what I say with sources. I do have very strong opinions, and I will state things definitively, especially when I can see some strong evidence behind it. But at the end of the day, don't believe something just because I said it. I've always said, double check what I say, and if you come to the same conclusion, that means you agree with me, not because I said it, but because, you've also looked into the subject as well. In the matter of authority, it's really weird because I look at heaps of people who are far more well-read and studied on subjects and things and know far more than me that I consider an expert, and I'm not there even close. Yet then there is this vast difference between me and a true layman who doesn't know much about the topic at all, and then they very much look to me as someone who's well-read and informed on the matter and things. And also, people have appreciated the fact that I don't necessarily come to my analysis from a wholly academic position because I love fantasy. I actually come to it from the mindset of both. I want to see, I've always done videos and my analysis, especially when it's regarding how these factual things are integrated into fantasy, from that mindset of looking at it from the both worlds, a more historical factual position, but also the context of the fantasy setting as well, and how do they mesh together. And that's the very thing that Brandon mentioned, why he wanted to pick my brain on Stormlight 4, because he appreciated that's been my approach. I could understand the context of the weapons being used in a historical point of reference, but also the point of reference of his world, and being a big fan of the Stormlight archives and his world, and the differences that, of the evolution of that world and where it might alter the way weapons and armor and things could be integrated into it, is important to really get a good grasp on. And so in that sense, it's interesting because I do wonder, who would you want to get as a consultant? Because I know there are great people who want to get it, but at the same time, I understand that you would also want someone who understands the world as well. And if I can fulfill that role, that's awesome. I'm always like, yes, hand up. I'm happy to do it. But also, like what's great is because I do have a lot of context in the academic fields and stuff, and I know all these people, I can contact them. And there was a couple of things that when I was consulting for Brand, I was like, I'm going to double check this. And I was able to throw out some of the context to get some good references and information. Like, that's it, got it. And so that also helps out.
Well, and that is kind of one of the building blocks of being an epic fantasy author is walking that line between what is familiar and real and what is the fantastical element in your world and making it feel real for the reader. I think a lot about this idea of kind of, it doesn't matter. Okay, and this might be like personally insulting to you, but I don't know. In my brain, I kind of think it doesn't matter how factual something is in a fantasy novel, as long as it feels factual to the reader. And that's kind of like when you get into talking about anachronisms and, okay, when did this technology actually happen in our world and all that stuff.
I completely agree. I can draw from a direct example from my own novel. So I am not a physicist, right? I actually don't know the language of math, and that's been a weakness for me. Yet I wanted in the book that they have a technology that's founded on the magic where they use a material called Darkstone that operates their skyships. And I wanted a science built around that technology, yet I don't know true science. And if you have the knowledge, I think utilize it to the most you can, because I have the knowledge when it comes to weapons, armor, medieval setting. And so the book I'm currently writing, because it's a full-on medieval fantasy, I am drawing on all the medieval knowledge I have, and I'm loving it. And there is this depth that I'm seeing in what I'm writing currently that honestly I haven't seen in a lot of other, contemporary fantasy novels, because I love their subject so much. I'm actually putting the swearing structure in the book reflecting what the swearing structure was like in the medieval period. And so, because now we use like cursing, profanity, and swearing as synonymous terms, where in the medieval period they were actually distinct things. Like to swear was to swear an oath, but you could swear an oath incorrectly, that would be a very offensive thing. And then you have profanity, which is taking, something that is holy and speaking of it in a profane way. And then you have cursing, which was literally cursing someone. And so if you curse someone that was not justified, that was really serious. And so, and that one is interesting, is the one that actually followed through, because in a lot of cultures, damn is still considered like cussing. When you say damn it or damn you or something like that, that literally comes from the cursing, like damn you is like damn you to hell. That's a serious business. It comes literally from a medieval historical context of how they contextualized what was offensive. And so I love that, like in my book, I have all that, where all the accurate kind of, offensive swearing and stuff. And that's something that I can draw on because I have much more understanding in that realm.
Yeah.
But going back to my analogy of the book, I don't know physics. And so I could spend, I don't know how many weeks, and I all power to people who, and I know Brandon does this a lot. He gets consultants in and stuff like that. And I could do that, and awesome. Or I could just make it believable enough for the reader.
Yeah.
And so there was a part where I wanted the main character to say that there's this mathematical equation to understand what the threshold is on this Darkstone to make it be able to move, because usually Darkstone is locked in space and it's called the Luminous Threshold. And so I was like, all right, I just kind of made up and made sure it sounded right, where he listed this mathematical equation where it was like mass times the L with the light squared equals this. But as long as it was factual enough, it sounded right enough, that's as far as it needed to go, because it needs to be, you're absolutely right, it needs to be sold to the reader in a believable way. It didn't need to be exactly the same. Now, it's interesting. I've had some physicists look at that equation, and then because it's vague enough where I didn't need to use exact terms, where I was able to see D, which is represented Darkstone, M, that might, for me, it was mass, and then I did, and the equation, I did squared or cubed. I can't even remember, but I was just kind of, would it be squared or would it be cubed? I know what it generally means, but I didn't know how to accurately translate to know, no, the light threshold would be a squared equation or a cubed equation. No idea. I just kind of, that one's, all right, I'll do that. But the thing is, though, because it is a fantasy thing, if it's squared or cubed doesn't matter, because it could be either one. I get to choose as the author. And so I didn't really need to know. But it's been cool to see physicists just kind of, all right, it'll kind of break down like this. And then I had someone say, oh, it's kind of like similar to the coefficient of static something. So I was like, okay, sounds good.
Yeah, that works. The showrunners of the Western show Deadwood, they talk about how because it's very famously lots of graphic swearing in the show, and they talk about how they had originally thought about, well, let's use period appropriate swearing, and they started writing it and realized, okay, this is going to sound like Yosemite Sam. It's going to sound like a ridiculous cartoon character, because that's just how people spoke at that time. Mm-hmm. And so it's that weird thing that, that writers, even writers that do historical stuff like that, have to kind of decide how they're going to present this towards a modern audience.
Exactly.
And make them kind of get what's going on and make it feel real, rather than having it be real.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You've touched on two really interesting sides of, I guess, interpretation or translation when it comes to something like that. And there are two camps, and I've been able to enjoy both sides. A great example is Wheel of Time. Robert Jordan, he created a whole complete swearing structure in the book that is foreign to ourselves. There are some similar words like bloody. Yes, we have blood in the real world, but they react to bloody far stronger as a swear word in Wheel of Time and other things. And they have blood and bloody ashes. And the one that made me really laugh is when a character, Elaine in the book, starts to collect cussing and swear words and stuff. And there was this one that she picked up, which was like mother's milk in a cup, which is like this really offensive thing. And she's mouthing, that sounds it. And then a couple of scenes later, she gets frustrated and blurts it out. And everyone reacts like, what the heck? But I mean, it's not offensive to us, but Jordan did a great way of selling that this is offensive in this world setting. Mm-hmm. The thing is, though, the audience, they're never going to react to mother's milk in a cup as like, they won't have an emotional reaction because it's just not a swear word to us. Even when it's contextualized in the book, we can understand why the characters are getting offensive, but we're not going to respond that way. And so the other option literally is to translate into a modern kind of thing to get the reaction that to kind of give the audience the same reaction that the characters in the book would. An example that I use for this, and I find this really intriguing, and I've had discussions about this with some of the other sword creators. The movie A Knight's Tale, love the movie, by the way, it's one of my favorite. In the beginning, it has modern music playing, We Will Rock You, and it's very out of place for a medieval setting. And I was watching like either a commentary or after thing, or it was the actual discussion from the director, why they chose that. And what he wanted the audience to feel the same type of adrenaline that the people of the day would be feeling when watching jousting. And so he wanted to translate, instead of the literal music, he wanted to translate the emotion that people would have had then. But to do that, he felt he needed to use modern music to get the audience to feel the same emotion. And so he was trying to translate feeling and emotion of the time period, not the literal same music. And I found that really intriguing. And to me, it is an intriguing thing, because you're right. You sometimes need to choose between, you can have the literal thing of what's in the world, or you can try and translate the emotion. But to do that, sometimes you need to use real world swearing or other references to get the audience's reaction, because we're a modern audience. We're going to react differently to things. And I can see value in both sides. I usually draw a line if it's like, it's funny because Knight's Tale is such a great fun movie. It's not trying to be a historical documentary either.
Yeah,
I still will pick it apart for the historical inaccuracies and things, but at the same time, I get what their intention was, and I think what is the intent behind the work matters a lot. And so I'll be far more critical of something that's supposed to be depicting a proper historical event. And even though Knight's Tale is based in a historical time period, these characters are mostly fictional. He's kind of based off of it, but so many liberties are taken is a different character. And so I can give that one more of a pass than, say, Braveheart, which is still a phenomenal movie, but the historical inaccuracies in Braveheart are extreme.
Right.
And people actually watch Braveheart and they come away thinking that a lot of people get educated on who William Wallace was from Braveheart. And so I do feel that there is a bit of a responsibility in when you're dealing with true history to actually try and depict it in an accurate way as best you can.
Right, and with something like The Knight's Tale, starting with We Will Rock You, that is telegraphing to the audience that this is what kind of a movie it is.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, don't take this as a documentary. It's a good, and it's funny. Like, I'm happy that they had. I'm not sure if they did it intentionally, but if it was, I'm really happy that they had the forethought to do that, because setting the tone is really important. Because then hopefully, because people talk about subverting expectations. It seems like the subverting expectations has not been playing well for people in modern media these days. Last Jedi, but sometimes it certainly can. I like a good twist it can be great, but you need to be able to have the foresight to be able to execute it well. Because if you don't, and then just diving into I will subvert everyone's expectations, usually just leads to disappointment and annoyance in the audience.
Yeah, and especially when you're coming at something that has a pre-existing audience that you're literally making to take money from them. You have to give them what they expect, or at least you have to give them something close enough to what they expect for them to come away happy.
Or, and this is when you need to do it correctly, if you are going to subvert what they're expecting, you need to give them something definitely as good, minimum, or better. If you replace it with something worse, oh boy, will they rage. And
that's the greatest sin.
Yes, exactly.
It's the greatest sin to turn something on its head, but do it badly.
Yeah, and you're literally dealing with things that people love. Like, people have strong emotional, sometimes it has molded who they are as individuals. Like because I think everyone knows subtext. We're talking about Star Wars a bit here, but like Luke Skywalker, one of the greatest heroes in media, like an icon of just incredible heroism and forgiveness and all these great things. And then if you're going to try and mess around with someone beloved as that, you should do that very cautiously and very respectfully.
Well, and I talked with Ari Salvatore on this podcast about exactly that. I talked about how killing Chewbacca was the moment I stopped reading Star Wars. But then when I became older and when I became a professional author, especially, it became much more easy for me to be sympathetic to like the position that he got in, which was an executive told him to kill somebody, and more sympathetic almost to the idea of, oh, we need to shake things up, we've got to do stuff. I'm not sympathetic to the execution, but I'm sympathetic to the idea.
Yeah.
And so you kind of come at these things from a different perspective when you're a creative professional versus just a fan.
Yeah, I could not imagine what it'd be like with people saying you have to do this thing, especially, you know, that's not going to work well, but they're like, no, we want, and it's like, oh boy.
Yeah, it can get a little rough. I guess the question is, how much do you find yourself writing to the audience you know exists versus, and this is both for your books and your videos, versus writing to what you want to be creating?
So far, it's always been the latter. I've only ever made content to, well, actually, YouTube is a little different, but for my writing, always to what my tastes are, and I've always just hoped, trusted that if I like it, there's going to be a lot of other people who must be like it too, that share my tastes, and not everyone is going to share that taste, of course. But so far, that's worked out quite well. I don't think my writing career has advanced enough to the point where, well, it's funny. There are some interesting predictions about the sequel to Shadow of the Conqueror. And I came into it knowing that I wasn't going to write the sequel right away, that I wrote it more as a standalone with possible sequel potential. And so I've always been happy to let Shadow of the Conqueror sit for a bit. But the theory crafting that has come up about what they are thinking is happening in the sequels, some are really like, that would be an enticing story. It's completely different to what I have planned, but it would be enticing. Wouldn't that be interesting? And so at the moment, I haven't been changing anything because I have some very fun plans for the sequel. But I wonder, I guess it'll be, because the more it progresses, I wonder if that will increase, what influence that would have on me. Don't know. When it comes to YouTubing, there's definitely, when I see content that people are enjoying, I was like, okay, that's working. And I'm more than happy to make more content like that people are enjoying. And it's interesting because that's not necessarily, I've never seen that as me doing stuff that I wouldn't really have done otherwise. But I do let the audience feedback guide the type of content that I move towards as a YouTuber. But it would never be to the point where it guide me to content because I don't follow fads, like, and everyone was making videos on fidget spinners. I look at that and say, that's really dumb. But it's in the algorithm. Everyone's watching fidget spinner videos. It's like, and so I rarely ever I jump onto fads because I want to do things I enjoy. And look, sometimes that might actually hurt me in the long run with how videos perform and stuff like that. But I got to make stuff I enjoy. That's the baseline. And so in that sense, I rarely ever follow what the trends are. But if my audience is liking something that I've put out that I've enjoyed making, it's like, okay, I'm happy to give you more of that.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. I do think it's going to be very different between kind of long form media, like a novel, versus something that you're putting out and that you need to be producing for algorithms, to be honest. Because that's got to be kind of a different, I don't know, a different creation, a different kind of thing going on in your brain in terms of how you create and how you continue to maintain an audience.
Oh yeah.
But also continue to be interested yourself. Because the moment, and I got to imagine this is definitely for novelists, and I got to imagine it's for YouTubers, that the moment that you start getting bored and you start kind of just doing it to do it, people pick up on that so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because a lot of people try and start to do the whole YouTube thing without realizing how much of a slog it can be. It's not easy. It's a long-term commitment. I was making weekly videos for a flat-out year, no break, just continually doing it and without making a cent. And so, but that's also really beneficial because it meant that I was doing it because I was enjoying it. Because if you're not doing this for the enjoyment, it's going to be very hard to get through the treadmill because there is a grind on the side of YouTube. And so I've been able to get through it because I'm passionate about the videos I'm making. I love the subject that I'm making and I enjoy it. And it's a great feedback thing because I love the response. I love the whole structure of the community interaction. I love reading comments, and even to this day, with a much larger channel, I read it a vastly high proportion of my comments, especially on videos that just dropped recently, because I love that interaction. I love seeing what people are saying about it, and I find it really fulfilling. And I also love watching videos that are made. I watch heaps of YouTube content. I love being up to date on what's being spoken of in our community. What are their discussions, and if I have something interesting to say, because there's another side of things. If there's a big commotion or like trending topic that I don't have anything that I know I could contribute to, even though it would do me well to make a video on it, I'll never force it. But if there is something that I talk about that's trending everything, well then it's a match made in heaven. Happy to do it then. And those videos, they could do really well, and sometimes they don't. It's a balance of things. But definitely enjoying the process is nearly I feel it's almost necessary because people are going into it, they don't realize that this is it can be a difficult job at times. There is definitely a burnout aspect to YouTube that you need to be able to balance, and it's hard at times. I admit sometimes it gets the better of me, and is where I'm just totally exhausted. But of course, what gets me back into it is that I like doing it. I'm passionate about the topic, especially when there's like a topic that I want to share with people. It's like, this is a really interesting thing that gets me going.
Yeah, and it's because you're not just doing the writing part. You're not just doing the creating. You are also doing the performing, which is two different types of kind of being a creative. Mm-hmm. Is there one that you prefer over the other?
I've always loved the performing side of things. It comes out naturally. With Shadiversity, I dedicate a lot more mental energy to the performance aspect. I want the presentation to be polished. I want the information to be correct. And so I do a lot of takes, because even in this casual conversation, if I point it out, people will be much more aware of it. Usually it's one of those things people aren't aware of until you point it out. But I have a natural way of kind of stuttering my speech. I'm like, and then I'll just keep going and stuff. In a Shadiversity video, none of that. And so there's a lot of cuts to make sure the delivery is clean. And it's interesting because it takes a lot more mental energy to film a Shadiversity video than, say, the videos I'm releasing on Night's Watch, which are casual conversations, very similar to what we're doing here, where it doesn't need to be as polished, where it's just talking with some friends about interesting things. And as it gets going, my performer side naturally comes out because I get ranty and things, but it's not something that I need to make sure is on, ready to go at the very beginning. Usually we'll just flow into it. And so there's a different mental energy needed to make just these two different types of content. And sometimes the mental energy to produce a Shadiversity video, I just don't have it. I wake up, I was like, I just don't have anything in the tank for it. We got to work on other things. We got to delay the thing. It's just not there. And so that's one that you need a balance. You need to be aware of it. It happens. That it doesn't happen nearly as much on the Night's Watch content because there's a natural flow and it's more casual like that. In terms of what I enjoy most, I've always enjoyed performing. And I probably like the prep work is interesting because the prep work is from my own casual study. And I do that just normally for fun. And then once I have enough information, then I ad-lib it. So I don't actually write scripts. I will ad-lib my content. Unless it's like a dedicated, because then there are many times when a subject comes up that I just get into a fever zone where I need the information. I start looking at. I recently did that on Crusader Castles because I'm prepping for a video on Crusader Castles, and I just got in this thing where I started casually looking up things, and that sent me down a rabbit hole. I was up until I think that was like almost a 6-hour study session just on Crusader Castles, looking at all the references, putting it all together. And so I rarely force the study just because I need, you only have so much mental energy in a day. And so I usually that is devoted to the things that have to be done. And then I draw on a lot of the information that I collect just casually in my own media watching, because I watch heaps of educational content just for enjoyment. Mm-hmm. And then that just builds until there's enough there to make a video on, unless I naturally start to fall into like a massive study session, and I rarely force it these days.
Yeah. That's very cool. That's interesting how you go about that. I feel like I could keep going, but I've kept you forever. So I like to end these podcasts by just asking everybody a very simple question of what's the last thing that you ate that blew your mind?
Oh, that blew my mind. Huh.
Or even that you just still think about.
That I just still think about. Problem is, I was sick for like 2 weeks, and so I've barely eaten anything. I've only just started to come out of it. That blew my mind. I know there was something recently, but it's just not coming. Might have been a really good corned beef.
Oh, man. You know what? My dad always made an amazing corned beef when I was a kid, and I've never been able to replicate it, and I have no idea why. I love corned beef, but only his, and it really drives me nuts.
Well, my wife made this amazing corned beef not too long ago, and I was like, "This is incredible."
Did she do it with like potatoes and stuff in it too?
Well, we always have mashed potato with it, but
okay,
it's the right balance of because when you make it, you add some brown sugar. I think it's cloves, and I forget the last one, but balancing that right, and because you don't want to boil too much of the salt out. And so getting the balance between the length of time and the flavors that you put in with it, everything can just hit this magic spot where it just is one of my most favorite foods. It's like, incredible. Oh,
that's good. That's good. I love a good roast. Like when I was growing up, like roast was that was the Sunday dinner, like mm-hmm. it was what Dad had to do every week, or whenever we were doing roast. And I always looked forward to that because Dad would put it in before church, and then it would be an excuse to leave church an hour early to make sure that it's not, getting, burnt or anything, mm-hmm. even though it wouldn't be done for 5 hours. Great memories of roast in general, roast beef, corned beef.
Good.
Kills me.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff.
That was YouTuber and author Shad M. Brooks. Thanks again to Shad for coming on. You can find links to his YouTube channel and his novel down in the show notes. You can find me, as always, at brianmcclellan.com. Special thanks to James Sutter for music and Tom Bishop for production. If you'd like to support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/pagebreak or buy my books in ebook, paperback, or audio. You can also get signed copies of my books direct from my website. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Huge thanks to Kyle Anderson, Patrick Hunt, and Elijah for their backing on Patreon.